Hey, Meredith, thank you for coming in. You have such a great background and working with clients like Amazon, AWS, Google, Pfizer, Panasonic, and so many more visionary founders. And I think it's really interesting. You have a background in theater, so we'll get into that as well. And really what your journey was to where you are today, where you're having such a profound impact on the world. So thank you for coming in and sharing your experiences to my audience.
Yeah, thank you, Stephen. Thank you for having me.
So Meredith, what were those two or three inflection points in your life that made you who you are today? And it could have been when you were 3 or 5 years old, inside, outside the family. It could have been a challenge or a really great opportunity that appeared, or a series. It could have been in school. It could have been something, an early job, or something happened later in life. What were those things that really shaped you to this wonderful person you are, and to how it really uh, became a catalyst for the wonderful contributions you're making?
Thank you for that question. I'll start with when I was younger. I was raised in Colorado, a pretty traditional family, and but things started to unravel later in life, and I can get to that because I feel like that's very, very pivotal for me as well. But I was an outgoing kid in like I had lots of friends and community, but I was also at the same time really terrified to use my voice, share my point of view, have conversations with people, especially in like a classroom setting where I felt the pressure that I needed to have the answers. I needed to sound like the smartest person in the room. I was afraid of the judgment and so forth. And so I was the kid who would often find that seat in the back row of the classroom so that I could hide, or at least give the impression that I was hiding, and always panicked, always just was so terrified that the teacher would call on me and ask my opinion of something, and then I wouldn't have the right answer. And it was crippling for in a lot of spaces. It was just crippling for me. And I I was dancing during that time. So self-expression wasn't a problem, but when I used words, that was the problem. And I remember I was probably around 12 years old, and I was in one of those uh, final dance performances that if you have kids that are in dance, they usually culminate in a final performance. And this particular teacher wanted each one of us to say a line of text from the stage. And the line of text she wanted us to use was about whatever it was that we wanted to be when we grew up. And so there I was on stage. It was performance night. I do a double turn and I land with my fists up in the air like this. And I say, when I grow up, I want to be just like Wonder Woman. And that was my line of text from the stage. And I said it as confidently as I possibly could. And after the performance, this woman comes up to me and she says, "You should take acting classes. You have such a wonderful stage voice." And so I did take acting classes, and I noticed that my confidence started to build because I got to play a role. I got to play this other person and use a playwright's words to do that. And then it wasn't later on in life until after college that I started to study improvisational theater. So making stuff up on the spot, but using frameworks and structures to do that, where that's now my point of view. Like I'm bringing myself into this, like you bring yourself into character with a script, but this is different. You're making it up. So that was huge and pivotal for me, was finding improv, because that really started to help me even further break out of my shell and answer that question, how can you be the most authentic? We hear it all the time. It's like, be authentic, but what does that really mean? So that helped me explore that question. And then I would say, moving, my family life, my father, when I was around 15, had a surgery that brought back all these repressed feelings of being a vet. He was a Marine in Vietnam, and he had experienced quite a bit of trauma. And so those flashbacks started to come forward, and that caused quite a lot of turmoil in our household around that time too. So I not only was learning how to use my voice at that time, but also found the theater my community where I felt safe during that time in my life. So I would say those are the pivotal moments that have kind of moved me in the direction that I'm in now. And then of course I've had other moments along the way to solidify that.
So that's really, really fascinating because you indicated that, you're very young and you have this particular kind of condition in your environment where it resulted in you being shy in many respects, right? You wanted to be at the back of the room. You didn't want to speak out. Um, you didn't want to in some way be embarrassed, perhaps, or
Yeah.
things like that, right? And yet you could dance, but you couldn't express that in words.
Mm-hmm.
And you indicate later in 15, your dad undergo surgery. I mean, he's a veteran, and then sort of the flashbacks happen. But I'm thinking maybe prior to that, that's maybe some of that repressed aspects conditioned who you were when you were very young, and maybe resulted in you being more restrained initially when you were very young, right?
I would agree with that. Yeah, I am very sensitive to energy. And so as a child, though, now as an adult, I could go, oh yeah, I was probably sensing energy in my household that wasn't healed. So it was a little bit of a crucible, right? That he was holding. So um definitely. And the dance, I feel, was maybe an outlet for me to express some of the stuff that I was holding, because it's hard when you live with someone that you love to not hold their stuff if they're not dealing with it on their own.
Yeah, and then you have this situation where you're dancing, but you have to.
Yeah. Right.
I'm Wonder Woman, and then fortuitously you have somebody in the audience say, "My God, you have this presence, you have this ability to express yourself, and you should think about magnifying that in some way or leaning into it, I guess."
Yeah.
And that's what got you into things like theater and Second City and
Mhm.
so forth. So you can see these sort of intermeshing of different aspects of your life, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so you're very young, you're shy, you get this moment where you express yourself. That's a pivotal moment because you're reframing who you are,
Mhm.
and you're reframing that into areas where you could do emotion and interconnect and express yourself in narratives and things like that. So when that happened, did you start going into things like theater in high school, or what was it after you finished high school?
Yeah, I did. I joined the theater club. I lettered in theater, in drama in school. And I was a terrible student. I wasn't a terrible theater student. I loved drama. You would find me in the art room where I loved visual arts. I was drawing all the time and painting. And I think airbrushing was really hip and popular then. And I was in theater classes and the drama club. And if I weren't in those two places, I was ditching school and smoking clove cigarettes under the gazebo. Like that was me. So I did not do well in school. In fact, up until I would say my junior year, I got a 1.2 GPA. I wasn't interested. I remember there was one class that I was in, it was an English class, and I did this Jim Morrison. We had to like read poetry and then do a presentation on that poem. And I can't remember, the poem was like something like the title of it was like, it's the revealing of the trunk or something. So I was like, oh, wouldn't it be great if I could reveal myself, like come out of an actual trunk? Like it was a little on the nose, but I was like, super excited about it. So I got a trunk from the theater department and I pushed it got my friends to help me bring it into the classroom. And I hunkered down. I'm a small person, so I fit in the trunk. And then I emerged from the trunk and I read my poem and I got an F.
Oh,
I got an F
wow.
because I didn't follow directions. So I was like, well, I'm out, so that was like my attitude towards things, was like, I'm out of here. And so I didn't do very well until my senior year of high school. I had my drama teacher actually taught an Eastern philosophy class, and we were like, reading the Mahabharata and doing Japanese tea ceremonies. And I was like, my world, I grew up in Fort Collins, Colorado. My world was getting blown. I was like, this is amazing. So I had a 4.0 that year because I was like engaged in the information that was being shared with me. So that was pivotal for me, like just going like, and then I had to go to junior college. I couldn't get into a 4-year college because I just didn't care. So I didn't have any real direction. And I was kind of, and my parents didn't really know how to, they didn't know how to mentor me during that time. I was not, my dad was a financial manager. My mom was a full-time interior designer, but they had a very linear way of kind of looking at life and how you get from A to B to C. So I meandered for a long time. I was like, okay, I just kept following my curiosities where I was told I could go, right? So, Meredith, you have to go to a state school. Okay. So I go to a state school and I'm like, theater department, right? Dance department. And so then I was like, I'm moving to San Francisco after I graduated from college. I'm like, I'm getting out of here. And at that time I was racing bikes because someone told me I couldn't. So you don't tell me I can't do something because I will try to prove you wrong. So I raced bikes competitively for 2 years. The first year was collegiately and I did really well. And so I kept doing that, but it wasn't the same kind of joy that I got being on stage. And so, and what drew me to San Francisco is like, I could race competitively and I could do maybe theater, right? But again, no real plan. I just moved there. And I was introduced to some physical theater forms called the Viewpoints and Suzuki and fell in love with it. I just fell in love with the rigor of it. And I fell in love with also the horizontal practice of presence. And so that was life-changing for me. And then I got to work with other practitioners of that work. And then I left cycling and just kept moving in that direction. And then I was also in this very scrappy sketch comedy group called Old Man McGinty with a bunch of actors who loved absurdist theater. And we kind of combined our love of absurdism with comedy. And we did very well in the Bay Area for a couple of years. And then one of our members said, I'm moving to Chicago to study improv comedy at this place called IO. And I was like, oh, well, I want to go study improv. So I also moved to Chicago and interned my way through IO and took classes and ended up performing there and simultaneously teaching kids. I was teaching kids in after-school programs theater, and I would bring my theater games and they would all culminate into a final performance that the kids created themselves, so devised themselves. And one of the women I got to work with was core faculty at the Second City. And she said, we're starting a curriculum at the Second City for youth. Would you like to be one of the people that we bring on board to help us develop this? I love your style. And I said, yes. And so I ended up helping them develop the curriculum for their youth program. And I was the first teacher to teach a kid at the Second City. And then that for 4 years turned into other opportunities, like working with the adult programs and some of the corporate programs that they had as well.
So that's a really fascinating arc, right? And
Yeah.
you're in high school, you get these kind of like traumas, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And in your environment, there's like traumas, and so you're wounded, and you're finding ways to heal some of those wounds, and you find it through theater, you find it through the visual arts, and that's a creative side.
Yep.
You get into racing, so maybe that's an expression of kind of the adrenaline stuff, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's a manifestation of the physical, that there's a physicality to racing as well.
Yeah.
And yet you have this home place where you can express your creativity and you're accepted and you can freewheel. And in fact, there's no F for freewheeling.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Does not happen.
It's going to give me a 1.2 GPA.
Right. And you get validation for that. You get validation of creativity, and you get validation for thinking out of the box and being an outlier. And because there's value in outliers, right? It's like value in atypical thinking, right? So, and then you end up getting this opportunity into Chicago, and then there's a second city, and then a youth program, and then you train the first youth in this area, which also then makes you adaptable, right? Because when you're dealing with youth, you have to adapt your communication, right? So
all the time, all the time. Yeah, it didn't help that there was a Starbucks downstairs either, because they'd all come up there with their frappuccinos. So I was dealing with teenage angst and sugar highs.
yeah, and in a way, youth don't have boundaries
Yeah.
often, right?
Yes. Yeah.
And so you have to deal and sort of flow with the kind of the unbounded ways and the creativity that can manifest. That would be just a fascinating time for you and continuing. So what happened next?
Well, uh, so I love improv comedy, and I just love improvisational theater forms in general. And I got an itching. I was in Door County, Wisconsin for a friend's wedding. And I had mentioned before, I really love the Suzuki viewpoints training, and that was a physical theater form that I really gravitated towards. And I wasn't getting a lot of that training in Chicago, but I was getting this awesome other training of improv comedy. And so I was kind of having an itch for more of that in the other kind of training, the Suzuki and viewpoint stuff and the physical theater stuff. And I was at this wedding, and it just seen two of my friends get married after a production of Merry Wives of Windsor, as you do when you're a total Shakespeare nerd. You get married right after your production. And so I went to their wedding, and the day after we're sitting in the volleyball courts and some people are playing, and I'm sitting there having a conversation with a friend of mine, and she goes, there's this program that just started at Naropa University in Boulder, where it's Buddhist inspired. So they're incorporating contemplative practices with viewpoints and Suzuki work. And it's all these practitioners from New York who are starting this program from the ETW, the Experimental Theater Wing at Tisch. And I was like, oh, are you kidding me? So I looked into it, and sure enough, all the names of people that I have wanted to study with or study with further. So next thing I know, I'm applying to this program that is like a year old in Boulder, Colorado. And I never thought I would return to Colorado, but so I went and auditioned and applied, and I got in. And so I was the second graduating class of that program. The program was, I think 19 years in length. It sadly closed its doors during the pandemic. But not only did I get to practice those things and incorporate my improv comedy in these other types of practices, physical theater practices, but it also opened my world to devising more theater and taking more agency over my creative life. So that's what I did. And I ended up staying in Colorado for about 10 years. I also met my husband during that time. And it was life-changing. And then I ultimately ended up, before the program closed, teaching in the program. I would be brought in as a guest artist and worked with the MFA students on them, helping them devise their works and then put them into performance. And then I also taught the business of acting, because that's something that I felt not a lot of actors get. They don't get they got a lot of talent and they know how to put things on stage, but the marketing business side of things can be a challenge.
And so you're teaching, you're there for 10 years, and you go back to your hometown, basically,
Yeah.
or your home state, right?
My home state, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and then what happened next?
Well, a couple of things kind of all happened simultaneously. We adopted my daughter, as a newborn, and she's African American, and she was from Oklahoma City. So we drove up through the night and met our daughter, and we just felt as parents that sadly Colorado is not the most diverse place in the country. So we were just noticing some of these, there were signs that were happening, and that we needed to find a different place to live. because we wanted her to be surrounded by more culture and diversity. So we made it our mission to figure out where that next place was going to be. At the same time, my father passed away. So my daughter's now 2 months old, and my dad passes away of, he had 3 contusions to his brain. We don't know what happened still. That's a whole nother, that's another podcast episode, that story. But he passes away. Things about his life were revealed. He was living basically a double life. And we took a 1-year RV trip throughout the country and then lived in Mexico for 6 months. And while we were there, decided to move to New York City. So I've been in Manhattan for 7 years now. And so that was hugely pivotal for many reasons, because then I not only we relocated our entire family, we went through this whole experience in this RV trip, but I also then took the trauma of my father's death and turned it into a performance piece. That was a whole nother healing process in its own that has definitely led me to where I am now as well. So yes.
So you did that as a performance piece. It's healing, and it's a kind of a spiritual, it's a generational healing as well, right?
Oh, very, very much so. Yes, very much so on a cellular level. Yes.
Yeah. In fact, there's epigenetic effects of this.
Yes.
As well, right. So
yes. Yeah.
And your daughter then will experience this birth. You're kind of being reborn, and she'll experience that, and that will expand her horizons as well.
100%.
So yeah, and it's a loving environment, and so you're still involved in theater then right now, or?
Yeah, so I moved to New York. I would say just a year prior to the pandemic, I was doing theater. I was auditioning, kind of auditioning. I never really I never really auditioned a lot. I was more about creating my own spaces and producing my own work. And I've gotten to produce work in some pretty phenomenal areas and with phenomenal people, but never really auditioned a lot. I auditioned a handful of times. I never had a lot of joy in auditioning, to be completely honest with you. I found it more traumatizing than fun, which is fine. But I did a little bit of auditioning here in New York City, but I was more interested in producing my own work and directing. So I was doing a little bit of that. But then the pandemic hit, and I was like, and I'm an equity actor, but I was like, I can't make a living doing, Zoom plays for an equity wage. Like, that's just, I can't do that. Like, it's not sustainable. And all the other work I was doing, like teaching improv workshops and producing and directing, all that stuff was shut down. So I immediately was like, okay, what's the one thing, Meridith, that you've been doing throughout all of this that might be more sustainable? And that was coaching leaders and coaching teams on how to communicate using improv. And I was also helping people with their presentations. And I was working with this other organization called Hillside, which works with medical experts. And so I immediately just started calling people, and I called Chris at Hillside, and I said, Chris, let me help you get online. Let me help you do what you do via Zoom. And he said, let's do it. So I helped him. And then I called people that had been in my periphery and I hadn't talked to for a long time, but I was like, I want to help you be able to present on Zoom. So I started to build a business, and I built a website, and I did all the things you do when you build a business. And then I got on weird networking calls on Zoom, like all of it. And simultaneously, I was doing the Zoom plays, and I noticed this shift in me, which was I was finding so much joy in helping other people find their voices and doing it successfully. And so that just gradually started to build. And next thing I know, I had this business, and I hired the Who's, I hired the coach, and I now I've hired an assistant, and it just started to blossom. And I haven't really looked back. I did, however, do a one-woman show. I did do the show about my father's death uh, while I was building that business, and that was extreme. And that actually had 3 different incarnations in its development. And I don't know if that one it'll probably resurface as well, but my main focus has been getting other people to share their voice, their vision, and their stories.
So now you have this amazing business, right? The strategic communication partner, experience director. So experienced director, and you work with tech leaders and founders, executives, entrepreneurs to help them simplify their message, amplify their presence, build deeper trust with their audience, right? And there would be some kind of emotional connection throughout all of that as well, right?
Yeah.
And so I could see now why you work with like Amazon, AWS, Google, Pfizer, Panasonic, visionary founders. Stop hiding behind your box.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Stop hiding. Get away from that podium.
Be what Wonder Woman.
Right.
Start creating real impact, right? And respect and connection and authenticity and truth. Gee, I can see all of these pieces. It's like a mosaic, right? Coming together.
It is. It
into
really
you.
is. Yeah, it really is.
And that would be your joy as well.
Mm-hmm.
So it sounds like then that's a whole side of business you're going to continue because it's sustainable, it pays the bills, things like that. And yet you can also do, because, you can do theater again,
Yeah.
things like
I
that.
can.
So.
I still have my agent. I still do commercials every once in a while because I think they're fun and I love getting my makeup done. Yeah.
So on the theater and kind of the improv side and all and the producing and the directing and do you see that being like 10% of your activities or 20 as you continue with your business? Because you've got a thriving business too, right?
I would say right now it's the percentage of that is a little bit lower. When I was doing my show, it was definitely it's hard. It's a lot of work to self-produce, and so it takes about, I would say, 50% of my time and energy to do that. But I will say what keeps me moving forward is that I am a collaborator by nature. So I'm always looking for other creative souls to be collaborating with. So I do have creative projects. So like, for example, I'm actually taking a retreat to Denver October 16th, where I'm working with entrepreneurs and visionaries to bring their stories to life. And I'm working in concert with a brand strategist. So he helps people develop their personal brands. He's a former hip hop artist. He's also creative in nature. And so the two of us are collaborating, and we have 15 attendees. It's an intimate event. And we are doing these really fun community meals together that are sponsored. They're all doing what I'm calling these 3-minute lightning talks, where I give them recipes and I give them particular ingredients that they use within those recipes to get them outside of their comfort zones and delivering their content in a different way. Rather than just standing up there and delivering their content, I'll give you an example of one of them. One of our attendees, I was in a Zoom call with her. She shared with me her 3-minute talk and where it's at so far. And she's just talking about the transformation of being this full-time entrepreneur business coach to her husband after 40 years with the same business, comes home one day and says, "I'm retiring." And she's like, "You're what? You're retiring?" Which means you're going to be here every day. So that kind of threw her off her axis. But the one thing she's always had, that's her place of solace and presence, is in her garden. She loves gardening. And so she's sharing about this transformation she's having from business coach into this gardener. And she just wrote this book called Good Dirt. And she just talks about the presence of like getting your hands dirty and being present with the plants, and how that can be a metaphor for how we approach life and our relationships. And so as she's sharing this with me, I immediately get this hit. I said, "Sherry, I want you to bring the following items with you." And she's like, "What do you want me to bring?" I said, "You need to bring with you a bag of soil. I want you to bring your shovel. I want you to bring your gardening gloves. I want you to bring one plant, one beautiful plant. And you're going to plant, you're going to, throughout the duration of 3 minutes, you're going to be delivering this talk and you're going to be planting this one plant. And at the very end of it, because it ends with the one thing that we need to be doing more of is love, leading with love. And then I want you to, on that last line, hand that plant to somebody in the audience as a gift of your love to them. And that's an example of how we can create unforgettable experiences that people are going to remember when they leave the room. And I believe, I don't care if you're a tech leader, and I don't care if you have an opportunity to stand out differently by being more intentional with how you deliver content.
So what you're doing then is you're also creating these private events, right?
Yep.
So that's amazing.
Yeah.
So and this is going to be like on an ongoing basis, right? So.
Oh yeah, and that to me feels like I'm creating a show.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So no, who introduced us? No, was it
Justin Breen? Yeah, because I was in Epic Fit. Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yep.
When I did the talk too,
yeah,
were you there?
Yeah, you
came.
Oh,
I
you
see.
spoke to us. Yeah, and I was like, I want to know Stephen more.
So, but this is, I mean, what do you hope to? Where do you see yourself in the world in 3 years, let's say, and your daughter and your husband, and so yourself, and then expanding to your daughter and your husband, and your work. Where do you see all of that in 3 years?
I see myself continuing to grow, continuing to question, challenge, leading with curiosity. My hope is that I can reach as many possible people that I can to get them to share their stories in a way that's connecting and engaging, because I truly do believe that when you can share your story and share your truth, that we can change the world. I feel like there's just too many people that are so afraid, or someone hasn't given them the permission to, or they haven't given themselves the permission to just share what's real. Even in the moments when, I mean, if you've got like I work with leaders who are in front of thousands of people on these platforms. And I was like, yes, you have to get some of this content out, and I get it, but like, you have such an opportunity to bring your heart and soul into the room, and you can do it. You don't need like an hour to do it. You can do it in 3 minutes. You can make a connection in 3 minutes. So let's figure out how we're going to do that.
That's remarkable. Are you going to capture some of these in shorts that you put out in videos or things?
Yeah,
like that?
I will. I definitely will. I mean, and part of the retreat that we're doing, it's all about content creation too. So
Right.
I've hired a professional videographer and a photographer, and so I myself am getting better at that stuff too, because I feel like there's just so much yumminess that needs to be captured and shared. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it'd be terrific, and just kind of expanding on this, and I think it would be consumable. People would be really interested. Your community would grow. So you could be, you could be a major influencer in YouTube and things like that, or TikTok, or I guess TikTok's going under new control.
Oh, who knows what's happening with TikTok? I have a TikTok following, which is lovely. I do have that. So, but now I'm like, oh, well, I probably put more attention towards YouTube right
now. Meredith, just really enjoying this open conversation. If there's, and this is really the last question, if what would you like to leave the audience, and sort of what recommendation and what questions do you want to leave the audience? So it's 2 parts. What recommendations, and then what questions do you want to leave the audience?
Recommendations would be, my recommendation would be to continue to lead with curiosity, and to be in constant evaluation of oneself. See where the opportunities live. So if you are someone that is a speaker and you speak often because you're called to for whatever reason, record yourself, watch it back, ask yourself, if I were in the shoes of the audience, would this have had an impact? Would I have taken action based off of the message that I'm sharing? What is it that I would have wanted to hear? Did I emotionally connect or not? So be in constant evaluation of oneself, investigation, if you will. And then the question I would ask is how, I guess, like, how do you see yourself in the world? What kind of a world do you want to be in? And what is your small part in that? And how can you give yourself permission if you're not showing up in the way you know you're capable of showing up? Then what is the shift that you can make to give yourself permission to do that?
So those are really great reflective questions, and then really great recommendations as well. And it kind of reminds me of this idea of questioning, observing, experimenting, associating, and networking, just always exploring. And I can see that you're always exploring. And it's just marvelous. Thank you for sharing so much of
Thank
your
you.
life's journey, but also your insights and your growth. And thank you for coming in today.
Yeah, thank you. This was a wonderful conversation. I appreciate you inviting me to have it.
Thank you for listening to the Brand Called You videocast and podcast, a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website www.tbcy.in to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for the Brand Called You.